The massive battle station called Nexus Prime floated in the darkness of space like a metal city. Its lights twinkled against the black void, and ships moved around it like tiny insects. Inside the station's main meeting hall, representatives from 12 different alien species sat around a huge circular table. The air hummed with the sound of translation devices working to help everyone understand each other. General Vorthek stood at the center of the room. He was 8 feet tall with dark green scales covering his body. His yellow eyes moved slowly across the gathered aliens as he spoke about the coming war. The Void Swarm was moving toward their part of the galaxy, eating everything in their path. Every world they touched became empty and dead. "We need every warrior we can find," Vorthek said, his deep voice echoing in the room. "This enemy destroys entire star systems. They turn planets into feeding grounds." Commander Zephy's floated beside him, her energy form shifting between blue and purple colors. She nodded as data appeared on the wall screens, showing destroyed worlds and dead ships floating in space. "The swarm learns from every battle," Zephy's added. "They adapt to our weapons and tactics. We must be ready for anything." Colonel Thranks clicked his mandibles together, the sound sharp in the quiet room. His insect-like head turned toward the other representatives. "My hive mind has calculated our forces. We have enough ships and soldiers, but we need perfect coordination." The alien leaders nodded and discussed their battle plans. The Kralians would lead the main assault with their powerful warships. The Zephyrians would provide energy shields and long-range attacks. The Thranks would handle supplies and communications. Each species knew their role in the coming fight. Then a small door at the side of the room opened. 4 figures walked in, and the talking stopped. They were much smaller than everyone else in the room. Their skin was pink and soft-looking. They wore simple gray uniforms and carried basic weapons that looked primitive compared to alien technology. Captain Jake Morrison stepped forward. He was average height for a human, but looked tiny next to the alien warriors. His brown hair was cut short, and his blue eyes were calm as he looked around the room. Behind him stood Lieutenant Amy Collins, Sergeant Ben Rodriguez, and Private Lisa Park. "General Vorthek," Morrison said in a steady voice, "humanity requests permission to join the Defense Force." The room went completely silent. Then General Vorthek's mouth opened, showing rows of sharp teeth. A sound came out that might have been laughter, but it was harsh and mean. "You?" Vorthek pointed one clawed finger at Morrison. "You soft-skinned creatures want to fight the Void Swarm?" Other aliens around the table began to make their own sounds of amusement. Commander Zephy's pulsed brighter with what seemed like humor. Colonel Thranks's clicking grew faster. "Look at them," Vorthek continued, walking closer to the humans. "They can barely survive on their own world. Their planet tries to kill them with storms and earthquakes and diseases. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities." He stopped right in front of Morrison, towering over the human captain. "What do you weigh? 180 pounds? I could break you with one hand." Morrison did not step back. He looked up at the alien general without fear. "We may not be the strongest, but we want to help defend the galaxy." This made Vorthek laugh even louder. "Help? You would be dead within minutes of landing on a battlefield. The Void Swarm would consume you before you could fire a single shot." "Sir," Lieutenant Collins spoke up, "we have studied the enemy. We have tactics that might be useful." "Tactics?" Vorthek turned to look at her. "Little female, your entire species discovered space travel only 50 years ago. We have been fighting wars for thousands of years. What could you possibly teach us?" Sergeant Rodriguez's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. Private Park looked down at her feet as the aliens continued to make fun of them. "Their technology is generations behind ours," said a tall, thin alien from the corner. "Their weapons use chemical explosions. Their ships move slower than our cargo vessels. And they are so fragile, added another alien with 4 arms. No natural healing abilities. No enhanced strength. They get tired and need to sleep every day. Vorthik nodded at all these comments. He walked around the humans like he was studying strange animals. Your bones break easily. Your skin tears from the smallest cut. You need special suits just to survive in space. We know we are not the strongest, Morrison said, still calm. But we want to fight for our new home in the galaxy. Fight? Vorthik's eyes glowed brighter. You mean you want to die gloriously and be remembered as brave? I understand. Even weak creatures can have honor. He walked back to his place at the table and looked at the other alien commanders. They were all still amused by the human's request. Very well, Vorthik said with a wave of his hand. Since you are so eager to prove yourselves, I will grant your request. There's a world called Kepler 442b where the Void Swarm is landed. It will be a perfect place for you to show your courage before you die. The other aliens nodded approvingly. It would be entertaining to see how long the humans lasted against real enemies. Thank you, General, Morrison said with a small bow. When do we leave? Immediately, Vorthik replied. A transport ship is waiting. Try not to embarrass yourselves too badly. As the humans turned to leave, the aliens began talking among themselves again, already forgetting about the small creatures who had just volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. How long do you think they will survive? Asked Commander Zephes. Not long, Vorthik answered. Perhaps an hour if they are lucky and hide well. Should we send a rescue team? Colonel Threnks clicked. No point, Vorthik said. By the time we could reach them, there would be nothing left to rescue. The humans walked through the station's corridors toward the transport bay. Other alien soldiers they passed looked at them with curiosity and pity. Some shook their heads sadly, thinking these brave but foolish creatures were walking to their death's in the transport bay. Morrison and his team prepared their equipment. Their weapons looked simple compared to the energy rifles and plasma cannons the aliens used. Their armor was basic metal and ceramic instead of advanced energy shields. Captain, Collins said quietly as they loaded their gear, they really think we are going to die. Let them think that, Morrison replied. Sometimes it is better to be underestimated. Rodriguez checked his explosives and tools. At least we will get a real fight. I was getting tired of training exercises. Park plugged her communication equipment into the ship's systems. All our gear is working. We will stay in contact with the base. Morrison looked at his team. They had trained together for months, preparing for exactly this kind of mission. They knew the risks, but they also knew something the aliens did not understand about humans. Remember, he said as the transport ship prepared to leave, we are not the strongest or the fastest. But we are still here when stronger species have gone extinct. There's a reason for that. The ship's engine started up, and they felt the vibration through the floor. Soon they would be in space, heading toward a world where an alien enemy waited to test everything humanity had learned about survival in war. As Nexus Prime grew smaller behind them, Morrison smiled slightly. The aliens had given them exactly what they wanted, a chance to prove that humans belonged in this galaxy. They had been underestimated before, and it had always been a mistake. 3 days passed slowly on Nexus Prime. General Vorthik sat in his command center, watching the screens that showed battles across the galaxy. The Void Swarm was attacking many worlds at once, and the fighting was not going well. His yellow eyes focused on the reports from Kepler 442b. The planet was covered in thick forests and had 3 moons. It should have been easy to defend, but the Void Swarm had landed there first and built their strange biomechanical structures. General, Commander Zephes floated over to him, her energy form flickering with worry. The Kralian shock troops on Kepler 442b have taken heavy losses. They report that the Void Swarm is adapting faster than expected. Vorthik growled deep in his throat. His best warriors were dying on that planet. The Kralians were the strongest fighters in the galaxy, with thick armor and powerful weapons. If they were struggling, the situation was worse than he thought. What about the Zephyrian energy warriors? He asked. They lasted 6 hours before retreating, Zephyrs replied, her form dimming with shame. The Void Swarm somehow learned to drain our energy attacks and use them against us. Colonel Threnx scuttled over, his many legs clicking on the metal floor. My hive mind reports that the enemy is using our own tactics against us. They study how we fight and then copy our methods. Vorthik slammed his fist on the table, making the screens shake. How is this possible? We have fought wars for thousands of years. These creatures should not be able to learn so quickly. The Void Swarm is unlike any enemy we have faced, Zephy said. They do not just adapt their weapons. They change their entire way of thinking. A communication officer, a small blue alien with large eyes, approached nervously. General, we have lost contact with several units on Kepler 442b. The last reports were strange. Strange how? Vorthik demanded. The units reported seeing impossible things, sir. Void Swarm creatures destroying themselves. Equipment failing for no reason. Some soldiers claim they heard voices in their heads telling them to retreat. Vorthik's scales rippled with anger. Psychological warfare. The Void Swarm is trying to break our soldiers' minds. Sir, the communication officer continued, we also lost contact with the human unit 12 hours ago. Their last message was, proceeding as planned and then nothing. Of course, Vorthik said with a dismissive wave. Those soft creatures probably died within minutes of landing. I expected as much. But Commander Zephyrs was studying her instruments with growing confusion. General, I am detecting unusual energy readings from the planet's surface. The patterns do not match any known technology. What kind of patterns? Vorthik asked, though. He was not really interested. He was more concerned about his real warriors. Systematic destruction of Void Swarm infrastructure, Zephyrs replied. But the attack pattern is chaotic. It does not follow any military doctrine I know. Colonel Threnx's antennae twitched as he processed data from his hive mind. The destruction is not random, though. Someone is targeting specific weak points in the swarm's network. Points that our best tacticians did not identify. This caught Vorthik's attention. He turned to look at the screens showing the planet's surface. Show me. The main display changed to show a map of Kepler 442b. Red dots marked Void Swarm positions, and yellow dots showed where explosions had occurred. At first glance, it looked like random destruction. But as Vorthik studied the pattern, he began to see something else. These attacks, he said slowly, they are cutting the Void Swarm's communication lines. Yes, Zephyrs confirmed. And they are doing it in a way that makes the swarm think their own units are malfunctioning. Impossible, Vorthik muttered. What force could move so precisely through enemy territory without being detected? A new alarm sounded in the command center. The communication officer's large eyes grew even larger as he read his instruments. General, he said in a shaking voice, we are receiving a transmission from Kepler 442b. It is from the human unit. Vorthik's head snapped up. The humans are still alive? Yes, sir. Lieutenant Collins is requesting permission to send a status report. Put her through, Vorthik ordered, though he could not believe what he was hearing. The main screen flickered and Amy Collins appeared. She was dirty and tired, but very much alive. Behind her, Vorthik could see what looked like a cave or underground tunnel. Nexus Prime, this is Lieutenant Collins, she said in a calm voice. Reporting mission status. You are alive, Vorthik said, unable to hide his surprise. Yes, sir. All 4 team members are operational. We have been conducting reconnaissance and disruption operations for the past 3 days. Reconnaissance? Vorthik repeated. You have been studying the enemy? Affirmative. Captain Morrison wanted to understand how the Void Swarm operates before engaging them directly. We have been observing their behavior patterns and communication. Methods. Commander Zephy's leaned forward, her energy form brightening with interest. You have been watching them? How did you avoid detection? Collins smiled slightly. We used camouflage techniques developed on Earth. The Void Swarm sensors are designed to detect energy signatures and movement patterns. They do not look for creatures that can stay perfectly still for hours. Hours? Colonel Thranks clicked in disbelief. You can remain motionless for hours? Human soldiers are trained to wait, Collins explained. We can stay in one position for days if necessary. The Void Swarm passed within feet of our hiding spots many times. Vorthik was beginning to understand that he had seriously underestimated these creatures. What have you learned about the enemy? They are not as intelligent as we first thought, Collins replied. They rely on their collective network to make decisions. When that network is disrupted, individual units become confused and ineffective. You have been disrupting their network? Zephy's asked. Yes. Sergeant Rodriguez has been using controlled explosions to damage their communication nodes. But we do it in a way that looks like equipment failure rather than enemy action. The alien commanders looked at each other with growing amazement. These humans had been conducting a sophisticated intelligence operation while the galaxy's best warriors were being defeated in direct combat. How many Void Swarm units have you eliminated? Vorthik asked. We have not been focusing on elimination, Collins said. We have been studying their weaknesses. But as a side effect of our operations, approximately 60% of the swarm's local infrastructure has been rendered non-functional. The command center fell silent. 60%. The Kralian shock troops, with all their strength and advanced weapons, had barely managed to destroy 10% of the enemy forces before being forced to retreat. How is this possible? Vorthik whispered. We use different tactics, Collins explained. We do not meet the enemy head-on. We make them fight each other. We create confusion and fear. We turn their own strengths against them. But you are so weak, Colonel Thranks said, his mandibles clicking rapidly. How do you survive their attacks? We avoid their attacks, Collins replied simply. We move at night. We strike quickly and then disappear. We never fight fair. Vorthik felt something he had never experienced before when dealing with other species. Respect. These small, fragile creatures had accomplished more in 3 days than his best warriors had managed in weeks of fighting. Lieutenant Collins, he said, formally, your mission parameters have changed. Continue your operations, but begin preparing for a major offensive. We are sending reinforcements. Understood, sir. We will be ready. The transmission ended, leaving the alien commanders staring at a blank screen. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Commander Zephy's broke the silence. General, I think we need to reconsider our assessment of human capabilities. Vorthik nodded slowly. Access their military database. I want to know everything about how these creatures fight. As the data began flowing across the screens, Vorthik saw records of human conflicts that amazed him. Wars that lasted for years. Battles fought in impossible conditions. Stories of soldiers who refused to surrender even when facing certain death. Look at this, Colonel Thranks said, pointing to one report. They fought a war that lasted over a century. Both sides adapted their tactics continuously, learning from every defeat. And here, Zephy's added, a battle where 300 humans held off thousands of enemies for 3 days. They all died, but they accomplished their mission. Vorthik studied the data with growing understanding. These humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years. They had learned lessons about warfare that his people had never needed to consider. They do not fight to show their strength, he realized. They fight to win. The next report, from Kepler 442b, arrived an hour later. Captain Morrison had captured a void swarm, command node intact, and was sending detailed intelligence about the enemy's greater strategic plans. For the first time since the war began, Vorthik felt something like hope. 2 more days passed before the next transmission came from Kepler 442b. General Vorthik had spent those days studying human military history, and what he learned disturbed him greatly. These creatures had fought wars using tactics that no civilized species would consider. They hid in tunnels and attacked supply lines. They pretended to be weak and then struck when enemies least expected it. They used their own weaknesses as weapons, making enemies underestimate them until it was too late. "General," the communication officer called out, "we have an incoming message from Lieutenant Collins." "Put it through," Vorthik ordered. Settling his large frame into his command chair, Collins appeared on the screen again, but this time she looked different, more confident. Behind her, Vorthik could see what looked like a captured void swarm facility with strange biomechanical equipment. "Nexus Prime, this is Lieutenant Collins reporting mission status update," she said crisply. "Report," Vorthik replied, though he was already amazed that the humans were still alive after 5 days. "All human personnel remain operational with only minor injuries. We have successfully eliminated 63% of Void Swarm infrastructure. On Kepler 442b, enemy forces are showing signs of coordination breakdown." Commander Zephy's floated closer to the screen, her energy form pulsing with disbelief. "Minor injuries? You have been fighting for 5 days straight." "We have been careful to avoid direct confrontation," Collins explained. "Captain Morrison developed a strategy based on the enemy's behavioral patterns we observed." "What strategy?" Colonel Thranks clicked, his insect eyes focusing intently on the human. Collins gestured to someone off-screen, and Captain Morrison stepped into view. He looked tired but alert, his uniform dirty but intact. "The Void Swarm operates like a single organism," Morrison said in his calm voice. "They share information instantly across their network, but this strength is also their weakness." "Explain," Vorthik demanded, leaning forward in his chair. "They trust their network completely," Morrison continued. "They never question the information they receive from other swarm units. So we began feeding them false information." Private Park appeared beside Morrison, carrying communication equipment that looked primitive compared to alien technology. "I have been intercepting their signals and modifying them before retransmitting," she said. "Small changes that make them think their own units are malfunctioning." Vorthik's yellow eyes widened. "You have been making them fight each other?" "Not exactly fighting," Morrison replied. "More like creating confusion and doubt. When a Void Swarm unit receives conflicting information, it stops moving and waits for clarification. This creates gaps in their defensive lines. Gaps that Sergeant Rodriguez has been exploiting." Collins added. The screen shifted to show Rodriguez, who was examining what looked like Void Swarm equipment. He held up a small device covered in organic-looking circuits. "Their tunnels are impressive," Rodriguez said with professional appreciation. "But they follow predictable engineering principles. I have been collapsing key support straws to channel their movement patterns. You are controlling where they go?" Zephy's asked in amazement. "Yes," Rodriguez nodded. "We make some areas impossible to access and leave others open. They think they are choosing their own paths, but we are guiding them into kill zones." Vorthik stood up from his chair, his scales rippling with excitement. "Kill zones? You have been hunting them?" Morrison smiled for the first time since the conversation. Began. "Humans are natural hunters, General. We evolved by tracking prey that was faster and stronger than us. The Void Swarm may be dangerous, but they follow patterns." "What patterns?" Colonel Thranks demanded. "They always take the path of least resistance." Collins explained. They prefer to move through areas that offer good defensive positions. They avoid open spaces where they might be vulnerable. So we give them what they want, Morrison continued. We let them move into areas that seem perfect for defense. Then we show them why humans learn to set traps. The screen changed again, showing footage recorded by human equipment. Vorthik watched in fascination as void swarm creatures moved through what looked like a natural canyon. Then explosions erupted along the canyon walls, and rocks began falling. Controlled avalanche. Rodriguez's voice explained from off-screen. The creatures thought they were moving through safe terrain. They did not realize we had been placing charges for 2 days. How many did you eliminate? Vorthik asked. Approximately 400 units in that engagement alone, Morrison replied. But elimination is not our primary goal. We are gathering intelligence. Intelligence about what? Morrison held up a device that looked like a cross between alien technology and organic material. We captured this from a Void Swarm command unit. It contains detailed information about their strategic objectives. Commander Zephy's brightened with interest. What kind of information? They are not just randomly attacking worlds, Collins said. They have specific targets. Worlds with certain mineral compositions. Star systems with particular energy signatures. They are looking for something, Morrison added. And according to this data, they have not found it yet. Vorthik felt his pulse quicken. This was the kind of intelligence the Coalition had been trying to gather for months. What are they searching for? We are still analyzing the data, Park sighed, but it appears to be related to some kind of energy source. Something they need to complete their expansion into this galaxy. If we can find what they are looking for before they do, Morrison said, we might be able to stop their entire invasion. The implications hit Vorthik like a physical blow. These humans had accomplished more than just tactical victories. They had uncovered the enemy's strategic weakness. How did you capture this device? He asked. Patience and planning, Rodriguez answered. We identified a command unit by watching communication patterns. Then we waited for it to separate from the main group. Waited how long? Zephy's inquired. 18 hours, Collins replied matter-of-factly. We remained in position without moving or making any sound. 18 hours? Colonel Threnx's mandibles clicked rapidly. That is impossible. No soldier can remain motionless for that long. Human soldiers can, Morrison said simply. We learn to control our breathing, slow our heartbeat, ignore hunger and thirst. It is part of our training. Vorthik was beginning to understand something profound about these creatures. They did not fight like civilized beings. They fought like predators from a dangerous world. What happened when the command unit separated? He asked. We followed it for 6 hours, Rodriguez said, studying its movement patterns and defensive protocols. Then Lieutenant Collins created a distraction while I approached from behind. What kind of distraction? Zephy's asked. Collins smiled. I pretended to be injured and made noise like I was calling for help. The command unit investigated, thinking it had found easy prey. You used yourself as bait? Vorthik said, horrified. And impressed at the same time. It worked, Collins replied. The unit became focused on me while Sergeant Rodriguez disabled its defenses. We captured it alive and extracted information before it could alert the main force. This is ... double quotes. Vorthik struggled for words. This is brilliant and terrifying. It is how humans survive, Morrison said. We use our intelligence to overcome superior force. We adapt to any situation. We never give up. A new alarm sounded in the command center. The communication officer looked at his instruments with growing excitement. General, he announced, we are receiving reports from other battlefronts. Human tactical advisors are being requested by coalition forces across the galaxy. What? Vorthik turned from the screen. The methods demonstrated on Kepler 442b are being adapted by other species. Psychological warfare, misdirection, trap setting. Early reports show significant improvements in combat effectiveness. Vorthek looked back at the humans on the screen. These small, weak creatures were teaching the galaxy's greatest warriors how to fight more effectively. "Captain Morrison," he said formally, "I am upgrading your mission status. You are no longer conducting the reconnaissance mission. You are now leading a strategic intelligence operation." "Understood, General," Morrison replied. "We will continue gathering information about the Void Swarm's objectives." "And Captain," Vorthek added, his voice carrying new respect, "the Coalition would like to assign human advisors to other battlefronts. Would your people be willing to share their knowledge?" Morrison looked at his team, and they all nodded. "We would be honored to help," he said. "Humanity wants to earn its place in the galactic community." As the transmission ended, Vorthek sat back in his chair and contemplated what he had learned. These humans were not the weak creatures he had first thought. They were something far more dangerous and valuable. They were survivors who had learned to think like their enemies and turn every disadvantage into a weapon. For the first time since the war began, Vorthek believed they might actually win. General Vorthek was studying human battle reports when every alarm on Nexus Prime began screaming at once. Red lights flashed throughout the command center as officers rushed to their stations. The main display screen showed something that made his blood run cold. A massive Void Swarm fleet had emerged from hyperspace just outside the star system. Hundreds of biomechanical ships moved in perfect formation toward Nexus Prime. Each ship was the size of a city, covered in organic armor that pulsed with dark energy. "How many ships?" Vorthek demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. 847 confirmed contacts, the sensor officer reported, his voice shaking. "More are still emerging from hyperspace." Commander Zephy's materialized beside him, her energy form flickering with panic. "Our main battle fleets are scattered across 12 star systems. We cannot recall them in time." Colonel Threnx scuttled over, his many legs clicking rapidly on the metal floor. "My calculations show Nexus Prime's defenses can handle perhaps 200 enemy ships. We are outnumbered 4-1. Vorthek stared at the approaching fleet and felt something he had rarely experienced in his long military career: fear, not for himself, but for every living being in the galaxy. If Nexus Prime fell, the Coalition's command structure would collapse. "How long until they reach us?" he asked. 6 hours at their current speed, the navigation officer replied. 6 hours. To prepare for a battle they could not win. Vorthek's mind raced through possible strategies, but every scenario ended in defeat. The station's weapons were powerful, but not powerful enough to stop such overwhelming numbers. "Sir," the communication officer called out, "we have an incoming transmission from Kepler 442b. Captain Morrison is requesting to speak with you urgently." "Put him through," Vorthek ordered. Though he wondered what the human could possibly want at such a critical moment, Morrison appeared on the screen, and immediately Vorthek could see that something had changed. The human captain's calm demeanor was replaced by intense focus. Behind him, his team was moving with quick, efficient motions. "General," Morrison said without preamble, "we have been monitoring Coalition communications. The Void Swarm fleet heading toward Nexus Prime is not a random attack." "What do you mean?" Vorthek replied, distracted by the tactical displays showing the approaching enemy. "This is a coordinated strike designed to eliminate Coalition leadership," Morrison continued. "The intelligence we gathered shows this has been their plan from the beginning." Lieutenant Collins appeared beside Morrison, holding the captured Void Swarm device. "The data indicates they have been studying our command structure for months. They know exactly how important Nexus Prime is to our war effort." "That does not help us now," Vorthek growled. "We cannot defeat 800 ships with what we have here." Morrison was quiet for a moment, Then he said something that surprised everyone in the command center. "General, I request permission to coordinate the station's defense." The room fell silent except for the continuing alarms. Even Commander Zeffie's stopped flickering as she stared at the screen. "You want to command the battle?" Vorthik asked in disbelief. "Yes, sir," Morrison replied firmly. "Human tactical doctrine may be effective against this type of assault." Colonel Threnx's mandibles clicked in agitation. "Captain, with all respect for your recent successes, this is not guerrilla warfare. This is a direct fleet engagement requiring years of strategic training." "I understand that, Colonel," Morrison said. "But the Void Swarm is expecting us to fight according to standard galactic military doctrine. They have studied how coalition forces operate in large battles. And you think they have not studied human tactics?" Zeffie's asked. Morrison shook his head. "They have only observed us in small-scale operations. They do not understand how humans think about three-dimensional warfare." Vorthik hesitated. Everything in his military training told him this was insane. But then he remembered the impossible things these humans had accomplished on Kepler 442b. "Explain your strategy," he said. "Do not meet them head-on," Morrison replied immediately. "The Void Swarm expects us to form defensive lines and trade firepower until one side breaks. Instead, we draw them into the station's defensive grid and use the structure itself as a weapon." "The station is not designed for close combat," Colonel Threnx protested. "No," Morrison agreed, "but it has something better. Complexity. The Void Swarm thinks in simple patterns. They expect clear battle lines and obvious targets." Private Park appeared on screen, her communication equipment connected to what looked like the station's main computer system. "Captain Morrison has been studying the station's layout for the past hour. He has identified 17 defensive positions that do not appear on any standard tactical maps." "What kind of positions?" Vorthik asked, his interest growing despite his skepticism. "Maintenance tunnels that can be used as firing positions." Rodriguez's voice came from off-screen. "Emergency airlocks that can be turned into traps. Service bays that can hide ships until the perfect moment to strike." Morrison stepped closer to his camera. "General, humans learned to fight in 3 dimensions long before we reached space. Our ancestors fought in forests with multiple levels of cover. We understand how to use vertical space and hidden positions." Commander Zeffie's pulsed brighter. "You want to turn Nexus Prime into a giant trap?" "Exactly," Morrison confirmed. "We let them think they are winning while we guide them into positions where their numbers become a disadvantage." Vorthik looked around his command center. His officers were staring at him, waiting for his decision. The approaching Void Swarm fleet was now close enough that individual ships could be seen on the long-range displays. "What do you need?" he asked Morrison. "Complete tactical command of the station's defenses," Morrison replied. "And permission to give orders to all coalition forces in the system." The request was unprecedented. No alien species had ever given tactical command to a human. But as Vorthik watched the enemy fleet approaching, he realized they had nothing left to lose. "Granted," he said. "All coalition forces are now under your command." The effect was immediate. Morrison's team exploded into action with a coordination that amazed the watching aliens. Collins began directing coalition ships to positions that seemed random, but followed some pattern only she understood. Rodriguez started explaining to station engineers how to modify defensive systems in ways their designers had never imagined. "All coalition ships," Morrison's voice echoed through the communication system. "Begin fighting retreat pattern Alpha. Do not engage the enemy directly. Force them to follow you into the station's defensive grid." On the main display, Vorthik watched as coalition vessels scattered in what looked like panic. The Void Swarm fleet immediately gave chase, their formations tightening as they pursued what they thought were fleeing enemies. "Lieutenant Collins," Morrison continued, "begin emergency power redistribution. Redirect all non-essential energy to defensive shields and hidden weapon systems. Understood, Collins replied, her fingers dancing over alien control systems as if she had been using them her entire life. The first void swarm ships reached the outer edge of Nexus Prime's defensive grid. Instead of stopping to bombard the station from a safe distance, they plunged deeper into the maze of defensive platforms and orbital structures, pursuing the retreating coalition forces. Now they are committed, Morrison said calmly. Sergeant Rodriguez, begin Phase 2. Explosions erupted throughout the defensive grid, but not where anyone expected. Rodriguez had placed charges on structures that looked unimportant, but were actually key support points for the Void Swarm's formation. Private Park, Morrison called. Initiate communication disruption protocol. Park's equipment sent out signals that looked like normal coalition distress calls, but contained hidden programming that interfered with Void Swarm coordination systems. The enemy fleet began to lose its perfect formation as individual ships received conflicting orders. Vorthik watched in amazement as the human strategy unfolded. The Void Swarm, thinking they were winning, pushed deeper into the station's defenses. But with each move, they became more scattered and confused. Phase 3, Morrison announced. All hidden coalition forces begin targeting priority vessels. Ships that had been hiding in maintenance bays and behind orbital platforms suddenly appeared, attacking Void Swarm command vessels with coordinated precision. The enemy fleet, caught completely off guard, began to fragment as their leadership structure collapsed. How did you know which ships to target? Vorthik asked. We studied their formation patterns, Collins replied. Human naval warfare taught U.S. that fleets always protect their most important vessels by placing them in specific positions. The battle continued for 3 more hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Void Swarm fleet, designed for overwhelming frontal assault, could not adapt to the 3-dimensional maze that Nexus Prime had become. When the last enemy ship was destroyed, Vorthik found himself staring at tactical displays that showed something impossible. The coalition had not just survived the attack, they had won decisively. Captain Morrison, he said formally, how did you know this strategy would work? Morrison appeared on screen one final time, looking tired but satisfied. Because humans have been fighting in 3 dimensions since before we left our planet. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Nexus Prime. General Vorthik stood in the same meeting hall where he had first mocked the humans, but everything had changed. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as representatives from all 12 coalition species discussed reports from across the galaxy that the war against the Void Swarm was not over, but it was no longer hopeless. Human tactical methods had spread to every battlefront, and coalition forces were winning victories that would have been impossible before. The enemy's advance had stopped, and in many sectors, they were actually retreating. Captain Jake Morrison entered the hall wearing a new uniform. Instead of the simple gray clothing he had worn months ago, he now wore the deep blue dress uniform of a coalition strategic advisor. Behind him walked Lieutenant Amy Collins, Sergeant Ben Rodriguez, and Private Lisa Park, all wearing similar uniforms. With rank insignia that had been specially created for human officers, the alien representatives rose from their seats as the humans approached. This gesture of respect would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier, but the galaxy had learned to see humans very differently. Captain Morrison, Commander Zephy said, her energy form glowing with warm colors. Congratulations on your promotion to Strategic Commander. The appointment is well deserved. Thank you, Commander, Morrison replied with a slight bow. But this ceremony is not about individual achievement. It is about partnership between our species. Colonel Thranks clicked his mandibles in agreement. The hive mind has calculated the results of human tactical integration. Coalition effectiveness has improved by 437% across all engagement types. Morrison took his place at the center of the room, where General Vorthik waited with an ornate metal case. The Kralian general looked different too. His posture was less arrogant, his expression more thoughtful. The past months had taught him humility. "Representatives of the Galactic Coalition," Vorthik began, his deep voice carrying clearly through the hall, "we gathered today to formally recognize the contributions of humanity to our war effort and to our understanding of warfare itself." He opened the metal case, revealing the Coalition Medal of Strategic Excellence, the highest military honor that could be awarded to a non-coalition species. "6 months ago," Vorthik continued, "I stood in this room and dismissed humans as weak, creatures unsuited for military service. I was wrong in every possible way." The alien representatives listened intently as Vorthik spoke. Many of them had made similar mistakes in judging human capabilities. "Captain Morrison," Vorthik said, turning to face the human officer, "your species has taught us that strength is not measured in physical power or technological advancement. True strength comes from the ability to adapt, to learn, and to find victory in impossible circumstances." He lifted the medal from its case. "By order of the Coalition High Command, you are hereby awarded the Medal of Strategic Excellence and promoted to the rank of Strategic Commander with authority over multi-species tactical operations." As Vorthik placed the medal around Morrison's neck, the entire hall erupted in applause. The sound was strange because each species applauded differently, but the meaning was clear. Every being in the room was showing genuine respect for human achievement. Morrison stepped forward to address the assembly. "Thank you for this honor," he said simply. "But I want to be clear about something. Humans are not better warriors than any of you. We are just different." Commander Zephy's pulsed with curiosity. "Different how, Strategic Commander?" "We come from a world that tried to kill us every day," Morrison explained. "Our planet has storms that can destroy cities, earthquakes that split the ground open, diseases that spread faster than we can cure them. We survived by learning to work together and never giving up." Colonel Threnx's antennae twitched with interest. "You learned cooperation through adversity." "Yes," Morrison nodded, "but we also learned competition. Humans fought each other for thousands of years before we reached space. We learned every possible way to win and lose. We studied our enemies until we understood them better than they understood themselves." Lieutenant Collins stepped forward. "What the captain means is that humans never had the luxury of assuming we were the strongest or smartest. We always had to find another way to survive. And that has made you excellent teachers," said a tall, thin alien from the back of the room. "Human advisors have shown us tactics we never imagined." Sergeant Rodriguez grinned. "We just think differently about problems. Where you see a wall, we see something to climb over, dig under, or blow up." This comment drew chuckles from several species, including General Vorthik. "The integration of human tactical doctrine has been remarkable," Vorthik said. "But it has also been humbling for those of us who thought we understood warfare." He gestured to a large display screen that showed battle statistics from across the galaxy. Before human involvement, Coalition forces were losing ground on every front. Our tactics were predictable, our strategies outdated. We followed the same patterns our ancestors used for thousands of years, Commander Zephy's added. "We never questioned whether there might be better ways to fight." Morrison nodded understanding. "That is natural when your methods have always worked. But humans never had that luxury. We always had to adapt or die." Private Park spoke for the first time during the ceremony. "We also learned that winning is more important than fighting with honor. On Earth, dead heroes are still dead." This statement caused some discomfort among the alien representatives. Many of their cultures valued honorable combat above victory itself. "That is perhaps the most difficult lesson for us to accept," Vorthik admitted. "The idea that survival matters more than following traditional rules of engagement." It does not mean fighting without honor, Morrison clarified. It means understanding that the greatest honor is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Sometimes that requires unconventional methods. Colonel Threnks clicked thoughtfully. The hive mind has been analyzing human military history. Your species has always prioritized mission success over individual glory. Because we fight for each other, Collins explained. Human soldiers do not fight to prove they are brave. They fight to keep their friends alive and to protect their homes. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the outer sectors. A coalition officer rushed into the hall with a data pad containing the latest battle reports. Strategic Commander Morrison, the officer said breathlessly. The Void Swarm has launched a major offensive in the Centauri sector. They are using new tactics we have not seen before. Morrison read the report quickly, his expression growing serious. They are adapting to our methods faster than expected. What do you recommend? Vorthek asked, automatically deferring to Morrison's tactical expertise. Morrison looked at his team, and they exchanged the kind of silent communication that comes from working together under extreme pressure. We adapt faster, Morrison said simply. Sergeant Rodriguez, begin developing counter-tactics for their new formations. Lieutenant Collins, coordinate with coalition medical teams to prepare for extended operations. Private Park, establish communication. Protocols for rapid information sharing. And you, Strategic Commander? Zephes asked. Morrison smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the calm captain who had first entered this hall 6 months ago. I am going to do what humans do best, he said. I am going to study this enemy until I understand them better. Then they understand themselves. Then I am going to teach them why it was a mistake to underestimate us. As the ceremony transformed into an emergency planning session, General Vorthek watched Morrison work with growing admiration. The human moved with quiet confidence, asking questions that revealed tactical possibilities no one else had considered. Later, as the planning session concluded and the various species began implementing Morrison's strategies, Vorthek approached the human commander privately. Strategic Commander, he said formally, I owe you an apology. Morrison looked up from his tactical displays. For what, General? For judging your people by their appearance rather than their capabilities. For assuming that strength could only take one form. Morrison considered this for a moment. General, you made the same mistake that most species make when they first encounter something new. You looked for familiar patterns and dismissed what you did not recognize. How do you forgive such ignorance so easily? Vorthek asked. Because humans make the same mistakes, Morrison replied. We just learned the cost of those mistakes very early in our history. When you assume your enemy is weak, you often discover you are wrong in the worst possible way. Vorthek nodded slowly. Your species has taught us more than military tactics. You have taught us wisdom. As reports began arriving of successful coalition operations using the new counter-tactics Morrison had developed, Vorthek reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy was becoming a safer place, not because humans were better fighters, but because they thought about fighting in ways that no one else had imagined. The ceremony had honored individual achievement, but it represented something much larger. It marked the moment when the galaxy accepted that wisdom could come from unexpected sources, and that survival sometimes required abandoning old assumptions about strength and weakness.